Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And in this video, what I want to do is go over how to deploy a Node application to Heroku. Now, generally the ideas that I'm going to talk about in this video apply to any Node application. I'm going to do an example with Express and mongoose or Mongo, so that way you can kind of see also how to incorporate a database, but the general principles are the same. At the end of the day, it's just they all connect. All Node projects connect the same way. So here I have an empty folder where I'm going to build out a mini Express project. So let's do that first. Now, first thing I would do is I would open up Terminal. And what I want to do is I want to make sure I create a new Node project. So I'm going to do node, or actually npm init-y. This creates a new package.json. So there's our package.json. Wonderful. And then I will create... I'll install some libraries. So npm install express and mongoose. That's all I need. Okay, we're gonna keep this real simple. Okay. Nice. Now, cool. And then we also want to make sure that we have a .gitignore, because there's certain things we never really want to upload to GitHub. That includes, so in this .gitignore file, we're always going to put our .env file. If you use a .env file, again, not necessarily always a requirement, but generally if you want to use environmental variables locally, then you're going to want to get that .env library, the library being .env. Okay, so my .env file, I never want to push that up to GitHub, and I never want to push my Node modules folder to GitHub because it's just a waste of space. Okay, so those are the two things you want to make sure you put in there. Okay. And in this case, we want to initialize our repo. So git init, I want to make sure I initialize. So notice I'm in the folder that my project's in, okay? So you always want to make sure that you initialize the git repo if there isn't already one where the package.json is. That should be the top level of your repo. If you don't, then everything else will break. Because Heroku is only going to look at that top level, and if it doesn't find that package.json at the top level of your repo, it's just going to be like, I don't know what you want me to do. That package.json is what's going to give it all the information it needs to know how to deploy your application. So git init. Okay, we created a repository. Great. Okay. And now I'm just going to create a file. Touch server.js. In this case, what I want to do is just make some modifications to package.json. Change the main to server.js. I definitely want to make a start script. That's the default, so just in case you forget to do a proc file later, it's going to default to npm start, so we want to make sure there's a start script. Node server.js. So basically, that's the command to do the thing. Okay, cool. So we're going to bring in our dependencies. So const express equals require express. Const mongoose equals require mongoose. Okay, now there's certain things that you want from your environmental variables. Okay. Now Heroku is going to have its own mechanism. Like usually, if you're working locally, you provide those environmental variables through like a .env file. Okay, that's why you would need the .env library. And in Heroku, you're going to use what's called config vars, which we'll talk about in a moment. But basically, what we want to do is grab the port, and Heroku will give you the port that we want to run the server on. And we also want to grab our database URL. And again, the port has to always be called port. The URL for Mongo is not set because that's not something Heroku gives us. That's something we provide, so we can call it whatever we want. So what I'm going to do is say const port, that always has to be uppercase port like that, equals process.env, because that's the object with all our environmental variables. That's just the way Node works. Okay, any variables inside the current environment will be stored in there. And we want the port variable. Okay, that's how Heroku is going to give it to you through this variable. So you have to make sure you grab this variable, and we'll just store it in the variable called port. So that way it's a little bit more straightforward. Then, okay, then we'll have our Mongo URL, URI, whatever you want to call it, really doesn't matter. I'll just call it Mongo. Just keep it simple. Process.env.mongo. Okay. And I'm assuming that this is going to be the URL, our connection string. Now here's the thing. Right now I don't have a .env file, so there's not going to be any environmental variables when I run this locally to test this out. So I'm going to want to make sure there's some default values, so that way if I don't have environmental variables, it defaults to a particular value. So I'm going to say I want the port to default to 4000. Okay, and then I'm going to want the URL. I have a local Mongo server running, so I can set up a local Mongo URL. So I'm just going to do mongodb / localhost 27017. That's just the default port for Mongo, and we'll just call it practice. And this has got to be a string, so let me wrap this in quotation marks, and there we go. So these ors just basically say, hey, make this variable equal this, but if this doesn't exist, then make it equal this. Okay, these are default values. Perfect. Now I got everything I need. Okay, but the idea again is that I'm going to grab these details. I'm going to grab the port from the environmental variable because Heroku will provide that for us, and I'm going to put this in an environmental variable because I don't want to put my mongodb.com URI or the URL to my actual database in the code, because I don't want people stealing the URL to my database. Okay, cool. So then what you would do is I still gotta finish doing this. Okay, so we'll just do some basic stuff. I'm just gonna say, hey, first we just connect to our database. So I'll just keep it super straight to the point. Mongoose.connect. Okay, and then we have to pass the URL, Mongo. Then we have to pass this configuration object, which has I'm not gonna even bother with that. And then we're just gonna pass a callback that just says hey, console.log connected to Mongo. I usually would do that as a separate event, but trying to do this. The point of this video isn't to do Mongo, but to deploy an app. Okay, and then I want to start the server listener. App.list. We'll have to create the express object. So let me go back up here and do that. Const app equals express. And again, the reason I went up there is just I like to declare all my variables at the top, anything that's global, because I like to know that all my variables are sort of declared in one place. Okay, and then we just do our listener, app.listen, and then we're going to pass in the port, and then a callback to run after it starts running. That says console.log listening on port. Oh, that's got to be uppercase port. Cool. And that's it. There's our Express application. All it does is literally connect to the database and start a listener. There's no routes, no nothing. Okay, again, the point is just to show you how to create a Node application. And again, all the things I'm saying apply regardless what framework you're using in Node. So if you're using Koa, you're using Fastify, you're using whatever, Heroku's still always going to give you this port variable. So you always have to do this. And generally, your database URL you're going to want to protect through environmental variables. So you're going to end up doing that. That's always the case. So now let me just test my script. npm run start. Okay, good. It's connected to Mongo, and it's listening to port 4000. Great. Okay, that's working. So we can deploy this app. Now, a couple things we need for Heroku. I need to add another file called procfile. What this file holds is essentially what is the starter command. So basically, Heroku, we're going to push our code to Heroku. Heroku will download all the libraries in the package.json, get everything all set up. But then we want it to actually start our server. What command should start our server? It doesn't know. We may have lots of different scripts and different commands. It just doesn't magically know. So we say, hey, I want you to start a web process. This tells Heroku that it needs to free up a port for our application, because our application needs to listen on a web port, a HTTP port. And then we say, okay, start a web process, and then run the command npm start. Okay, I'll just do npm run start to be explicit. So basically what this means is it'll start a web process, and then when it starts that process, it'll run the command npm run start, so that way, and then that's going to be our program. Cool. And it'll pass it the port and all the environmental variables. Cool. And that's pretty much the setup for the application. There's nothing else we really need to do here. Now I'm going to show you two ways to deploy. First, I'll show you sort of the quicker way up front, but has some downsides. This is using the Heroku CLI. So you would go to Heroku.com and look up the Heroku CLI command line interface and download it. You would know you have it. I think if I can just type in Heroku -- version. Yeah, see, you'll get like something like that. Heroku -- version. I have the Heroku CLI installed. So what you do is if you just download it, you'll type in Heroku login, because you have to log in. This opens up the browser. So it's going to take a second. This is going to open up the browser somewhere. Oh, I see it opened it up over here. Okay. Then I would click login. And then that's it. Okay, I'd close this. And then I go here and it's login. I'm logged in as my account. Okay. Cool. So then what I would do, and again, you have to download this Heroku CLI tool. Like, this doesn't just magically come on your computer, so you'd have to go to the Heroku website, download and install it. But then what I could do is I could type in Heroku create, and then I can also give the project a name. So this is going to create a new Heroku project, and we'll call it Practice Deployment 1 AM. I always use your initials because the way Heroku works is that it's not like GitHub where everyone can have projects of the same name because they use your username. So it's like your username / your repo name. Here, every possible name can only be used once by one person. So you're very likely to hit a already used name if you use something that's not personalized in some way. Practice Deployment 1 AM. I hit enter. And what this does, see, it creates this project. So I now see that this project is created. And see, it adds this remote. So it actually literally adds this remote. So if I do git remote -v, see, Heroku has added this remote so that I can push my code directly to Heroku. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to set up some environmental variables. I want to set up my database URL. Okay, so I would head over to mongodb.com, assuming that you're using MongoDB. Okay. And so many emails. Let me think. Jedi. Okay, so I log in. Always takes a second. Okay, not the quickest loading page in the world, but you know, it does the job. So then you're here. I'm assuming you've already set up your, again, this is not a MongoDB lesson, but the idea is I'm assuming you've set up a cluster on MongoDB. I'm going to go to connect. Okay, I have to create a database user. I'll do that in a second. So I'm going to go to database access, create a new user. So I'm going to create a user with the password. Create a password, and the password will be user. And I'm going to make this a temporary user, so that way it only lasts 6 hours. Okay. No, thanks. Okay, clusters. So now I go back to my cluster. And the reason I set up a temporary user, so that way people don't use my database. And if they try, it'll only work for 6 hours from me recording this video. Connect. Well, it's updating, but I can now go connect to your application. And then I just copy this URL. Okay. So I'm just going to paste this URL up here and just replace, see right here where it says password. So see, there's my username, user, because I just created a user named user. And I place the password. And then here we can change this to whatever we want. So I'll just call this cheese. It really doesn't matter. It's just the name of the database you're writing to. You can have as many databases of any names as you want in your cluster. I'm going to copy this URL. And then I need to make sure I set the variable. So again, if I look at my server.js, I chose to use process.env mongo. So I need to make sure that there's a variable in Heroku called Mongo that has the URL. So the way you do that is you do Heroku config set, because I'm setting a variable. Then I put the name of the variable, Mongo, equals, and then I paste the URL. There's the URL. Then I hit enter. And see, it does the thing. See, it set Mongo. And see, now this variable is available. Okay, cool. Technically now my app is, well, not deployed yet because I haven't pushed it yet. So now I need to do a git add, a git, okay, git add, git commit -m, first commit. And then I just need to push to Heroku, git push Heroku. And since my branch is main, because again, I generally default to a main branch, you might default to a master branch. So you got to make sure you use the right branch name, but git push Heroku master. Failed to push some refs to 4K. Oh, it's got to be master. Okay. That's right, because Heroku hasn't changed that yet. Oh no, I typed in master. Never mind. Oh my. Git push Heroku main. There we go. Okay, there it goes. So it pushes up the code, and you can see like it's doing the thing. So it's installing all my dependencies, and it's just building out the project. It's just doing the thing. Build succeeded. Yay. Cool. Okay. It's finishing up. It's finishing. And there we go. It's done. It's deployed. So now I can click here. Open. And I should just get a cannot get. Yep, cannot get, because again, I didn't make any routes. But it's deployed. And if I just want to double check there's no like errors or anything like that, what I can do is I can do Heroku logs --tail. This shows you the logs. Because again, now the code is running on a server somewhere. So it's not going to show up in your terminal all the output you would normally see when you're developing locally. So if you want to see that output, all those logs, you have to go to the Heroku logs. So Heroku logs tail will show you those logs. Okay, and I can see here, and see, like there's our console log, listening on port 10.48.7, because that's the port that Heroku gave it. That's why we were using that environmental variable, so that way Heroku can give our application the port. If you just choose a random port arbitrarily, your app will not work, because you're not using the port that Heroku gives you and changes it up all the time. So like once a day, that number is going to change. And then I can see it got connected to Mongo. So I can see that, yeah, my app's working. Okay, got the variables. It works. Okay, cool. So that's the first way to deploy your application. Okay, that's the first way. I'm going to deploy the same app. The second way we deploy it is we use GitHub. Okay, so I will just call this practice node Heroku deployment. Okay, create the repository. I will copy this URL right here. So see, it already has the command perfectly ready for me. Git remote add origin. So I'm gonna just copy that. Head back to my terminal. Okay, get out of the logs, Control C. Then I'm gonna just paste the command. And then I will git push origin main, because now once by running that command, I've added another remote, git remote -v. So see, I have my Heroku remote, so I can push directly to Heroku, and then I have my GitHub remote, so I can push to GitHub. So I'm gonna go git push origin main. That pushes to GitHub. So I go here and I refresh. And you see like my node modules folder didn't get pushed up because we have it in that git ignore. But I got everything else I need here. So then what I would do in this situation, I would go to Heroku.com. Okay, I would go to Heroku.com, and let me just delete this app. So this is the app we just deployed a second ago. I'm gonna go delete it. So settings, I scroll all the way down to the bottom, delete this app. So I'm just delete it. No need to have this just floating around. Okay. But in this case, I'm not going to use the Heroku CLI. All I did is I pushed my code up to GitHub. I'm going to create a new application. We'll call this practice Heroku deployment 2 AM. And then I go to this dashboard for my project. So first thing I'm going to do is going to go to this deploy tab. And here what I want to do is I'm going to change my deployment method from Heroku Git, which is what we did a second ago, to GitHub. Okay, so then it's going to allow me to connect to my GitHub repo over here. So I would just look up practice, because that's how it starts. Search and just look up practice Heroku deployment. Here we go, practice node Heroku deployment. I'll connect that repo. So that repo is now connected. Now I want to turn on automatic deploys. So I can choose which branch I want to deploy. But I want to enable automatic deploys, because that'll do is that every time I push to GitHub, it'll just automatically redeploy it. That's why I generally personally prefer this method. Because with the Heroku Git method, while the Heroku CLI is super convenient, every time I update my app, I'll have to make a separate push to Heroku then to my GitHub. Okay, so which is fine. It's like not much of a difference. You just do git push origin master, then git push Heroku master, like not the end of the world. But and then also this, I don't have to worry about it whether I have like Heroku CLI installed, etc. But that's going to enable automatic deploys. But that's not going to happen until the next time I push to GitHub. So in that case, I'm going to do a manual deploy. Okay, so I'm going to hit deploy branch, and that'll just do an initial deployment, which is not going to work because I still have to set that. I have to set my environmental variable. So before I used the CLI and I did like Heroku config set. Well, to do the same thing, you would go to settings, and in settings, I can go here to reveal config vars, and I can take my URL again. So I'm going to take that same URL that I have like right here. Okay, and I'm going to create my key, which again, earlier we set it as Mongo. It could be anything. Again, the variable names don't matter as long as they match. Okay, the fact that whatever I used in my code matches what I said here is what matters, not that they're any particular name. The only environmental variable whose name matters is port, because that's the only one that Heroku is going to set up for you. So they put the URL there, and that's added. Okay, so now I should be good to go. So now I go here. Everything succeeded. Should be working. Should be working. Because see, every time you change the config vars, it restarts your app. So it should work. So if I go here, yep, cannot get. It's working. Because again, I didn't make any routes or anything. And then if I go to more, I can view the logs here too. So I can go here to view logs. Anything I could do in the console, in the CLI tool, I can do from the Heroku dashboard in a different way. So I'm going to go to view logs to view the logs. And see, I can see like listening on port 3670. So again, that number is going to be very random. So that's why we need to use the environmental variable, because we don't know what's going to be. And then I can see connected to Mongo. So connected to Mongo. Wonderful. It works. Okay. With that, I'll delete this. So scroll down, delete the app. Delete app. And there we go. And that's it. That's all there is to deploying apps on Heroku for Node. Now, if it's a different type of project, like you're doing Go, Rust, okay, head over to tuts.alexmerced.com. I generally do have like detailed tutorials where I go through Heroku deployments for Rust, for .NET, for Java, for Go. There's more. Laravel for PHP. So generally, if you read through my blog, you can find deployment advice on any language. But this video is focusing on how to use Heroku for Node. And that's it. Basically, all it is you push up the code. As long as the package.json is in the root of your project, and you set any configuration variables, then you're good to go. It's probably one of the easiest languages to deploy in Heroku, versus something like .NET, which was a bit more difficult, because that one you only have one option, which is to use Docker, which is easy once you know it, but not easy if you don't know it. Cool. So with that, I'll see y'all later. You have a great day and enjoy.